The United States has proposed security guarantees conditioned on Ukrainians' withdrawal from Donbas. And why is France not supporting the EU plan to procure Storm Shadow missiles for Ukraine? We'll talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, the White House has described the trilateral talks involving representatives of Ukraine, the United States and Russia held in Abu Dhabi as historic. This was stated by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt during the briefing. Also, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy subsequently announced that new trilateral meetings would take place later this week following a report by the Ukrainian negotiating delegation. This format indeed marked the first trilateral dialogue in a long time aimed at ending the war. In your view, how effective was the Abu Dhabi trilateral format in advancing Ukrainians' strategic objectives?
Well, the talks in Abu Dhabi are, of course, very important for the American side because we understand that for President Trump, for the White House, it is very important to continue the discussion, to continue the conversation. But in what way the conversation is being shaped? This is one of the big questions that we are all asking ourselves now, especially after the Financial Times publication, although the representatives of the Trump administration and in particular, the deputy to the press secretary, deputy to Caroline Leavitt, Christopher Miller, already said that the talks actually were very successful, and we cannot say that there are any thing true to the Financial Times publication, and they actually said that this is a lie, according to the deputy press secretary of the White House. The publication of the Financial Times actually states that the U.S. administration has linked the security guarantees to Ukraine to the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donbas region and from the Donbas, the territory that Russia does not control, but that Russia really wants to take. So judging by these conflicting pieces of information, from the one side, we have the Financial Times reporting based on sources. On the other side, we have the official position of the White House that they reject this information. This is a false information. They say that this undermines the peace process that the Trump administration is following and trying to pursue. But in any case, it is very important that the conversations are happening for the American side. And we see that the American side is really trying to rush the things. They do want to go faster, as fast as possible. We've heard it also from the Russian side. Peskov, the spokesperson of Putin, also stated that the Americans are in a rush. They want to do things fast, and we see that. Of course, this is a style of President Trump. His style is moving fast, and as we know, it's the symbol of the Silicon Valley, that saying, move fast and break things. But unfortunately, when we are talking about the war, when we are talking about negotiating a peace deal, or even not a peace deal, maybe just a ceasefire, or I'm saying just, it's already very important. Move fast and break things doesn't really cut it. It doesn't really work. So the U.S. guarantees that may include, similar to NATO's collective defense clause and similar to NATO collective defense guarantees, that can be linked to giving up territory. I think we've already heard something like that. It's been, this idea has already circulated previously, but we know that previously Ukraine was very harsh in declining this opportunity or declining this proposition from the American side. but we don't know how truthful are the sources of the Financial Times. But in any case, I must say that the talks in Abu Dhabi, the fact that the talks are happening in Abu Dhabi, this is already quite important, that this shows how invested the Trump administration actually is into getting some kind of a peace deal. And I stress some kind of a deal. They really want a deal, any kind of a deal, not the deal that would really, let's say, make Russia move out of Ukrainian territories, but they want a deal, some kind of a deal, especially prior to the midterms, especially prior to November, and especially on the backdrop of falling support for President Trump.
Alexandra, there should be only one form of pressure on Russia. The question is how this pressure should be applied. There are multiple options, and Kyiv Post reports that Ukraine is currently conducting a quiet campaign to obtain US Tomahawk cruise missiles. Dan Weiss, president of the American University, Kyiv, has emphasized that Europeans should be the ones to demand them, as it would ultimately be European countries that finance these tomahawks. In effect, Europeans should therefore advocate for and fund them. The vast majority of European partners firmly support Ukrainians' victory and generously finance Ukrainian state budget. However, they do not advocate for tomahawks and do not finance them. Does this not represent a strategic inconsistency between their declared objective, Ukrainians' victory, and their actual policy choices?
Well, yes, we see fear in that. We see fear in countering the Russian side. We see fear. We see fear on all sides of from those who are supporting Ukraine. We see fear from the European side. The Europeans are quite concerned about giving long-range missiles to Ukraine. They're quite concerned about the response that they might see coming from Russia. Although the Davos forum, the forum that happened in the past week, gave some kind of a hope that the Europeans are getting getting together in order to counter Russia and in order to see themselves as one of the main actors of the international relations, and really remember or remind themselves actually that they are a military power and they are a military superpower, especially if we're talking about the nuclear weapons, because in the region there are two countries that have nuclear weapons officially, de facto and de jure. That's France and Great Britain. So we understand that both those countries have nuclear weapons. Both those countries, one in the European Union, the other one not in the European Union. Both those countries are part of potential collective European security. And of course, we understand that the European Union can get their, let's say, finances together in order to spend more money on their own security. Right now, we're talking about 5%, and the Europeans are only have the plan to come to the 5% in the framework of NATO, but probably with the political will, and that's the main problem, with the political will, it's possible to come sooner to this number of 5% or even more for the collective security of the European countries, of NATO countries in Europe. So we understand that the possibility is there. But for now, we see that fear of the retaliation from the Russian side, retaliation basically in the Baltic states. And we understand that there is a Baltic sentry by the NATO countries, but still there are some concerns about what Russia can do. And on the American side, it's not the fear, it's the unwillingness to give long-range missiles, only because there is a fear in not being able to come to some economic and financial agreements with the Russian side, because the Trump administration mainly aims at actually getting great deals with the Russian side, with the Kremlin, as soon as it is possible. And it would be possible as soon as at least maybe not the war is over, not the peace deal is signed, but at least when there is ceasefire. We don't know if it's going to be a ceasefire deal or a peace deal, but in any case, this would open the window of opportunity for the American businesses, for the American entrepreneurs to invest in Russia and to potentially gain big revenue from signing those contracts. So there is another kind of fear, not the fear of retaliation. Of course, the Americans do not fear any retaliation from the Russian side, but there is this unwillingness to hinder their opportunity to actually get great deals as soon as there is ceasefire. So business is standing at the front with the American side, but with the European side, it's some kind of, let's say, fear and some thoughts regarding the retaliation, actual military or paramilitary retaliation from the Russian side.
We heard that German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius stated that Germany is currently unable to provide Ukraine with additional Patriot air defense systems, as the country itself is awaiting deliveries to replace the systems already transferred. At the same time, France has opposed the procurement of British Storm Shadow missiles for Ukraine using EU funds. Paris is blocking an initiative intended to simplify Ukrainians' purchase of British Storm Shadow cruise missiles through a 90 billion euros EU credit facility. According to the Telegraph, France insists that these funds should be directed primarily towards supporting the defense industries of EU member states rather than toward purchasing weapons produced outside the European Union. In your opinion, does the current EU approach signal a limitation on rapid military support, or is it a temporary bureaucratic hurdle or fear, as you said?
Well, I believe this comes from fear. I believe this comes from the realization that the umbrella, let's put it this way, of the United States is still there. But the European countries, the EU countries mainly, not the UK, but the EU countries mainly are fearful if the United States are actually there. Are they actually going to support the European Union? Are they actually going to do something? Although the umbrella, let's say the nuclear umbrella, the United States umbrella, the umbrella that is linked to NATO is still there. But I believe that especially after all that's been happening with Greenland, especially after all the words that were coming from the White House, the European Union now understands that they first of all need to prepare for safeguarding their own security. They cannot think right now clearly about the security of Ukraine because they fear for their own security. Previously, they were sure, the United States are here. The United States will be that safeguard. So, of course, they don't need to think about their own security because they have the United States and they can think about Ukraine. But right now, after everything that's been happening with the Trump administration, and especially because this is the second Trump administration, the European Union has already seen almost the same thing in the first Trump administration. It wasn't at this scale. First of all, because there was not a full war happening in Europe at that moment, because it was a war, but mainly on the territory of Ukraine, and it was not that much of attention coming to the war happening, the Russian war with Ukraine that started in 2014. But in the first Trump administration, the European Union was not that attentive to what's been happening happening over there. But they already saw how the United States could actually vote for someone who doesn't believe in that securing of European borders and European security. And they can not only vote for him one time, it's not just a glitch of the system, but they can vote for him the second time. And what's the safeguard for the European Union that not Trump anymore? Trump will not come to power in the third term. There will there's no possibility to have a third term. But what's the safeguard that there won't be another Trump, let's say another someone like Donald Trump, like J.D. Vance, for example, who is even less invested in European security in the White House? What's the safeguard? There is no safeguard. So the Europeans are seeing right now, especially because it's the second term, it's the second time that the Americans choose this president and this kind of a president. So I believe it's coming solely from the fear of the European Union. It doesn't have anything to do with any new circumstances, with any new talks. No, the position hasn't changed. But first, they want to, let's say, secure their own borders and secure themselves before thinking about Ukraine.
Alexandra, also about United States of America and Iran, because I see that US assembles massive naval force near Iran. US President Donald Trump said that Iran is seeking to reach a new deal. The statement came amid the arrival of a US aircraft carrier strike group in the region and White House discussions of possible military strikes. Axios reports, despite the military preparations, Trump believes that Tehran sincerely wants a diplomatic settlement. In your view, what leverage does the US gain by demonstrating naval strength while simultaneously expressing openness to diplomacy? What is happening with the US naval deployment near Iran, if you know, and your own opinion?
Well, first of all we know is what we hear from the Trump administration, and the Trump administration is saying that the situation around Iran is in process of changing, as President Trump puts it, due to the large armada that the United States sent to the region. As President Trump posted, we have a large fleet near Iran, more than we had near Venezuela. This is how President Trump put it in his interview. And at the same interview with Axios, President Trump also says that there is a possible option to make a deal. They want to make a deal. I know that. They have called repeatedly. They want to talk. According to Axios, according to the report, President Trump was quite close to making or giving the order to strike the regime in Iran. However, he postponed it due to Jared Kushner and due to the countries of the Persian Gulf that worked through Jared Kushner and some other people close to President Trump, because they tried to explain that this would destabilize the region. The United States don't have enough military forces in the region, but right now they have enough. Right now they have enough forces in the region. And right now we understand that the Iranian regime is also waiting for a strike. That's all the sources are saying that Khamenei is in the bunker, that he's hiding, that the leadership is hiding, that they are expecting some kind of continuation of the American pressure in a real strike. But for the Trump administration, it seems that again here the window of opportunity is a little bit past, maybe. But we've seen many times, although having said that, we should remember that with the Trump administration, many times we've seen that things that are expected expected from President Trump, he doesn't do. And things that are most unexpected from President Trump, he does. So we don't know how the situation will unfold. I believe that it's highly likely that the United States would continue pressuring Iran, and maybe pressuring for quite a long time, as we've seen with Venezuela, because before Nicolas Maduro was extracted from Venezuela, we've seen a long time, a few months of the American side building up pressure on Venezuela. Maybe we will see something like that with Iran, and maybe the United States would want to make a deal also with Iran, with Iranian leadership, or with the countries of the Persian Gulf that right now ask President Trump not to strike Iran, fearing that this will destabilize the region. So I think that we are in quite maybe even a long period of escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Although, again, we all should remember that sometimes President Trump acts the way no one expects him to.
Alexandra, what about Greenland? The administration of US President Donald Trump has abandoned plans for a military invasion of Greenland to gain control over the island. The reason is the threat of impeachment that could be initiated against the American leader in such a case, Reuters reports, citing sources.
Well, I believe that everything that is right now happening with the Trump administration somehow stems from not that good of a polling numbers, actually. We see that President Trump is not as popular as he used to be. And the very important thing to say right now is that, first of all, Greenland is not part of the United States. Greenland will not be part of the United States. Greenland is a sovereign territory. Greenland is the territory of Denmark, and that's it. This is the main thing that we know, that President Trump will not use military force. Right now, we know from different sources, and including President Trump himself, that there is a concept of a deal with Greenland regarding the U.S. military bases, regarding the U.S. military bases being more robust in Greenland. And it all came after a very successful talk with Mark Rutte, or it came after very terrible poll numbers of President Trump. And it seems that it actually came after the bad poll numbers of President Trump, where we saw that more than 80% of Americans, close to 90% of Americans, were against using any kind of military force to get Greenland, to acquire Greenland, or to make Greenland part of the United States. And close to 60% were against, and openly against, using any finances from taxpayer funds, actually taxpayer money, to buy Greenland. So the Americans on both sides of the aisle are united. Finally, they are united in something. They are united in a willingness to say to the Trump administration that they don't want Greenland. They don't want Greenland in a military. They don't want a military use of military force in Greenland. They don't want use of financial force. Let's put it this way. They don't want to use their taxpayer money on Greenland. So the Americans are united in that. And also after what's been happening in Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota in general, and especially in Minneapolis in January, 2 killings of 2 American citizens by ICE and Border Patrol. These terrible situations led to worse ratings of President Trump and worse ratings of the Republican Party. That is a big surprise for the Republicans because throughout the year, Democrats had such terrible ratings that the Republicans didn't actually need to do anything. They just didn't. They just had to sit quietly, sit idly by, and get all the good numbers and really get ahead of the Democrats. But after 2 killings of 2 American citizens in Minnesota, Right now, what we see is a better rating of the Democratic Party. Not because the Democratic Party suddenly became popular, but just because more people don't want to support the Republican Party that is now fully a Trumpian Republican Party. So it's actually because of the Trump administration's actions is that the Republicans are getting less support and that President Trump is getting less support. So seeing all that, we see, first of all, a pivot on Greenland, and now a pivot on Minnesota. And probably we will see now some changes into ICE tactics, most probably, especially after the border czar, Tom Holland, went to Minnesota, and George Bovino, the head of ICE, left Minnesota. It was reported by Wall Street Journal just a few hours ago.
Alexandra, a heartful thank you for joining us today for this meaningful conversation and for unwavering support for Ukraine and its people. Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst and member of the European Leadership Network UK, shared her insights with us. Please share this interview and continue standing with Ukraine. Alexandra, thank you again and see you.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.